as part of Dying Matters Week, Family Support and Bereavement Services at KEMP Hospice thought it might be a really good idea to talk about some of the themes that come out of counselling with adults, young people and children around situations that they've experienced with loved ones that they maybe wanted to have difference with, or to being able to say those things. So together, we're today kind of thinking about what things do you think that clients that you've worked with would have liked to have discussed with their loved one before they died?
I think funeral wishes is a really big one. Just really simple things, sort of like, do they want to be buried or cremated? What songs they would like for their service.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we think we know, but when it comes down to it, unless somebody's been very explicit, you don't know. And if you've got to make a decision, big decisions, without any kind of heads up from the person that you've lost, it can feel like, you know, the biggest mistake if you think you get it wrong. Something really simple, such as do they want to wear their own clothes, or, you know, things like that. All these little decisions you have to make during the funeral process, they can feel like the end of the world if you don't get it right. Whereas if somebody's kind of told you explicitly, that takes away a lot of the anxiety around that process.
Yeah, because it could really complicate the grief, couldn't it, if you felt guilty that you hadn't got it right. Yeah, I remember hearing this lady talk about her death book, and she'd actually photographed all the things she wanted to give to her family and put their names against it. And I thought that's a really nice idea. It's like a photo album of her possessions, but she also included what she wanted to do with her pet, you know, which could easily get forgotten, couldn't it? You know.
Yeah. So thinking about funeral wishes, do clients kind of feel it's easier or helpful to have them written down, or to kind of formalize them?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
stated clearly, can't go wrong then.
Yeah. Written down is important, I think, for a lot of people, because at that time decision making is hard for many people anyway, isn't it? And so to have something where those wishes have been made clear, it can stop any confusion or conflict as well within sort of families and friendships and things that people feel ought to have been done.
Yeah.
The cost of a funeral as well can come as a surprise to some people. So, you know, that's a really good opportunity to have a discussion about the specifics of what they want, like what sort of coffin they want, because it might be loved ones want the best for the person that they've lost, and the best coffin is obviously really expensive. So having that conversation about and being realistic about the cost and what they want and what they can afford.
Yeah, and the wake, you know, what do they want to, you know, have for their post-funeral get-together?
Yeah,
that's the kind of thing. You know, what do they want? Do they want a special whiskey there or something like that? You know, that needs to be identified.
Yeah, I think it's interesting if you think about Prince Philip, because he planned it all, didn't he? Down to designing his hearse and all of that. So we don't all have that luxury, obviously, to design a hearse, but you know, just to know what's important to them and what they want to be part of the day. Because I think even in the most sort of close-knit families where you think everything, you know, we're all going to think the same, you're all going to grieve differently, and it's all going to throw up different things for you. So conflict might happen where you least expect it, whereas if things are written down or explicitly arranged, it's just one thing you don't have to worry about, isn't it? Or fall out over.
Yeah. And sometimes, sorry, go on, Lynn.
Things are going to be written down as well, to actually tell the family where it's written down.
Yeah,
because that can cause a lot of issues if somebody writes down their wishes and then files it away somewhere, and then it's found by the family after the funeral.
Yeah.
And clients I've worked with before have found it really helpful to have that information, you know, to know that their loved one has had a part in their funeral, a little bit like Prince Philip, you know, that they're playing the songs that their loved one wanted, they're following those wishes. It can be really helpful, can't it?
Yeah.
Thinking about children and young people, how should they be involved with death?
My experience of talking to young people, they need to be involved in maybe planning the funeral, maybe doing a reading, or, you know, pallbearing even. You know, some of the older teens have done that for a loved one. It's just about being involved and having a voice. You know, they can be the forgotten mourners, often children, and yet they really, really, really need to be apparent and play their part, so they will go forward with their grief, you know, partially resolved almost, you know, because they've had that part to play.
Yeah.
So children put things in the coffin, you know, pictures. They go to the chapel of rest, you know, they touch the body as well. They do all that, and then they feel that they are just a part of the family. You know, it's as simple as that. And it really goes a long way to helping them with their grief further down the line, because they've said their goodbye, they've had that chance, you know.
Yeah,
I think sometimes linking to, if there's a charity that they're particularly linked to with the death, that they get involved with the charity as well. Quite often, if they're enabled in the way with fundraising and doing things, it's the doing things for children that I think is important.
That's really true. I mean, a lot of our young people do something for KEMP. It's interesting. They come and do a bit of fundraising for us. Yeah.
And we also work with patients and loved ones of people with life-limiting illnesses, and sometimes there's things that aren't said before that loved one dies that they really wish they'd spoke about. Do you find themes around that too?
I think something that I've come across is sometimes the person that is life limited, the person that is end of life, perhaps doesn't want to have that conversation about the fact that they are dying. So their loved ones respect that, but that can leave them feel like there's been lots left unsaid, you know, that they would like to have had that really honest conversation, but they have to respect the wishes of the person that's dying. That can be really difficult, because perhaps they wanted that real bedside conversation that we see in the films that, let's face it, it doesn't happen a lot really. Not many people get that opportunity, but if you can, you know, if you know you can have it and it's taken away from you, that can, and then there can be a bit of resentment sometimes if they haven't been able to have that.
Yeah, and that all impacts on the grief process then, doesn't it? Yeah. I think with children and young people, they often don't get to say their goodbye. They don't get to go to the hospital, you know. Sometimes they may choose not to because they're fearful, you know, what they're going to see. So then they have this massive guilt, you know, that they didn't go in that day because the loved one then died. You know, and they didn't get to say. So when we talk about what would you have loved to have, you know, if you could say one more thing, I mean, it's usually, you know, I love you, or I really miss you, you know, I really miss going to football with you or having a McDonald's, you know, that kind of thing. So.
And sometimes they want to say sorry for things that have happened in the past.
Yeah.
There's been conflict within the family that can really impact on the grief process if they didn't get the chance to apologise for things.
Yeah, because you might have had an argument, especially with children. I hate you, you know, and then they go off and then that parent dies. That could weigh very heavily on children. And it's, you know, a big piece of work to try and help them get over that, or make their peace with it, I should say.
Yeah.
And as we come to a close today, I think the theme that comes out from everything we've talked about is being open, talking, being frank about what needs to be said, and also maybe we all need to plan what we want for our funeral to make it a little bit easier, so that we're in a good place as much as we can be. Yeah.
And if it is hard to talk about, as we said, you know, write it down. You know, you perhaps don't want that conversation, but, you know, write it down, or plan your own funeral with the funeral director. It doesn't necessarily have to be a heart-wrenching conversation, does it? But just you know, to help people that are left behind so they don't feel so lost, really. If they know that your wishes are being fulfilled, that must feel a lot easier.
And don't forget the children. They need this as well.
Yeah.